In the dark underwater cave, a diver, as if possessed, personally discarded all his gear. When people found his body, the rebreather scattered nearby was intact. There were still plenty of cylinders left. This bizarre cave diving accident occurred at the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole. The Eagle's Nest Sinkhole is located in Florida, USA. From above ground, it appears as a small pond with a diameter of 50 meters, but beneath the shimmering surface lies another world. From 1981 to 2018, it has claimed 13 lives. It is one of the most dangerous caves in the world. Even so, this vast underwater maze continues to attract countless diving enthusiasts. From the cross-sectional view, the shape of the entire cave resembles a tree. Its deepest point reaches 95 meters, but its horizontal span is up to 1 kilometer. The total length of the tunnels is 1,600 meters. The tree heart is a vast space called the banquet hall. To the right extends the upstream tunnel. It is the trunk of this tree. At the end, it connects to the dome house. To the left branches off the downstream tunnel. It branches out like tree limbs, getting narrower. Branching off are spaces like the Half Moon Room, Gym Room, and Fantasy House. The entire system is not just a single path. Instead, it is a deep, complex three-dimensional maze. In 2016, 3 diving friends planned to go to the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole. Among them, Chris and Peacock are not just diving partners. They are also a couple in private. Both have many years of cave diving experience. The Eagle's Nest is more familiar to them than their own backyard. Justin, on the other hand, is less experienced in cave diving. This time, he will not go deeper. Instead, he will stay on the surface. According to the plan, this trip's route is to start with the upstream, enter the water from the pool, pass through the banquet hall, passing the gym room and fantasy house, advance all the way to the dome house at the upstream end, then turn back to the banquet hall, then turn into the downstream Lockwood tunnel. Finally exit the water. This is the deepest passage in the entire cave system, like a deep root slanting down from the trunk. Because the body needs to gradually adapt to pressure changes while ascending. After finalizing the plan, the two entered the water early. At the left side at 6 meters, 21 meters, and 36 meters. Secure the decompression cylinder and emergency cylinders respectively. At 2 p.m. on October 15th, Chris and Peacock officially entered the water. Pass through the narrow shaft that only allows one person to pass. The internal world of Eagle's Nest Cave gradually unfolds. Below the shaft, the darkness suddenly expands. A chill rushes in from all sides. However, they are well prepared, each carrying a fully enclosed rebreather. This device can recycle exhaled gases. It is standard equipment for deep cave diving. It also has 2 side-mounted cylinders and a spare cylinder. Each person has one underwater propulsion device. Peacock is also dragging a third spare behind him. The underwater propeller is battery-operated. It can travel continuously underwater at a speed of 5 kilometers per hour. In a cave like Eagle's Nest, which spans up to 1 kilometer, without it, one could never reach the depths relying solely on human power. This dive is flawless, from equipment to experience. The two swam in, passing by the fantasy house along the way. The sedimentary rock colors on the cave walls are intermingled in shades. It's like an open geology textbook. Each page tells a story from millions of years ago. Catfish glide past them. There's also a species of cave crayfish. It is completely white and transparent enough to see its internal organs. In this place, where sunlight never reaches and food is almost non-existent, it has quietly existed for 200 years. After passing through the super house, the two felt it was pointless to go further. So they turned around and swam back to the banquet hall. They went straight into a narrow passage called the Abyss Passage, heading towards the fantasy house at the downstream end. Who would have thought that this sudden decision would lead them into the real abyss? After 3 p.m., Justin on the shore followed the arrangement to dive every half hour. But as it approached 6 p.m., he still hadn't seen his teammates at the decompression point. He didn't dare to think much and immediately picked up the phone to gather a group of diving friends. At 11 p.m., the first rescue team entered the water following the two's planned route. They prioritized searching upstream, but the decompression cylinders remained untouched. They thoroughly searched the upstream and around the banquet hall. Until 3:30 a.m., nothing was found. At 3:45 a.m., the second rescue team organized by the police took over and entered the water. Go straight down the downstream. After 15 minutes, they reached the entrance of the Abyss Passage. The situation at the scene left everyone gasping. 2 bodies eerily floated at the top of the cave. Peacock was still wearing the rebreather, but the mouthpiece had come out of the mouth. The cylinder was almost empty. Meanwhile, Chris's rebreather, underwater thruster, and headlamp had no malfunctions. There was even enough gas in the cylinder. But all this equipment was scattered around. 2 days later, rescue teams retrieved the bodies and equipment, one by one. Based on the autopsy report, equipment debris, scattered positions, and dive computer records, people could only piece together bit by bit. The truth submerged in darkness. When the dive reached the 43rd minute, Chris was the first to dive into the Abyss Passage. Peacock followed closely behind. But this passage is extremely narrow. The two men's high-end gear is too bulky. It's difficult to maneuver through the corner at the bottom. Moreover, the thrusters stirred up the silt at the bottom. Visibility was close to zero, so after 3 minutes, both men retreated from the abyss. At the 58th minute, Chris adjusted and successfully navigated the corner. But Peacock remained stationary, because he had not descended for a while. At the 61st minute, Chris at the bottom returned to the entrance. From here on, Chris, as if possessed, began to remove his rebreather, thruster, headlamp, and cylinders, one by one. Seeing this, Peacock immediately shared his regulator with him. The two of them huddled together to share the cylinder for breathing. Judging by the scattered equipment, they must have struggled towards the exit. But Chris, having lost his weights, could not sink. He was held up at the top of the cave by the buoyancy of his dry suit. This is the scene that the police discovered initially, according to the officially released accident data. Perhaps we can speculate this way. At the 58th minute, the reason Peacock did not come down for a long time might be that he was carrying two propulsion devices. He was trapped at the entrance. Chris then returned to save him. But in the narrow passage, let alone saving someone, even turning around was difficult. So he removed the heaviest gear from his body, one piece after another. After successfully escaping, the two shared one cylinder. They moved the removed gear to the wider area at the entrance. They attempted to put on the gear and return. Unexpectedly, Chris, who lost his ballast, was buoyed against the cave ceiling by the dry suit's buoyancy. After Peacock's attempts to save him were in vain, he chose to stay with him until death, ultimately suffocating. Of course, this is just my personal speculation. The real answer will forever remain buried in that darkness. And the eagle's nest never lacks for the next person. Late night on July 18, 2018, 20-year-old Saeed came with a few friends. They arrived at the eagle's nest sinkhole in the dark. They were all free divers, relying on holding their breath to dive. They had no tanks and no cave diving experience. Their experience in open water was also very limited. They played around in the pond for a while, but it wasn't enough. Saeed turned to his friends and told them he wanted to break his personal record here. The goal was to dive to a depth of 24 meters. Don't laugh at the eagle's nest. Such a depth is daunting even for the experienced. The further down you go, the greater the pressure, because gas consumption is 10 times that at the surface. A small mistake could be fatal. And what Saeed intended to use was just the breath in his lungs. He took a deep breath and jumped into the water with his companion. The two dove to the bottom of the pond, sliding down along the rock wall. Unbeknownst to them, they had already crossed that narrow chimney passage, arriving at a depth of 24 meters underwater, which is the top of the banquet hall. At this point, his companions chose to turn back and ascend, but Saeed continued to swim downstream. At first, no one was too worried. After all, it's quite normal for free divers to hold their breath for a few minutes. However, 10 minutes went by, and the surface remained still with no sign of him. A few of them jumped back into the water to search around, but still, they found nothing. They knew what lay below, and no one dared to go any deeper. Finally, they had no choice but to call for help. Rescue personnel conducted a search that night, but the darkness made it impossible to begin. The search and rescue effort had to be halted. The next day, the rescue team entered the water, and found Saeed at the top of a gravel pile approximately 46 meters deep. According to the events that transpired, the police suggested that the main reason for the tragedy was the lack of any lighting equipment, combined with the fact that it was the middle of the night, with no light in the cave. When he wanted to return, he couldn't find the exit at all. In the end, he drowned and sank to the bottom, landing on a pile of sand and gravel. Interestingly, it happened to be lying on that historic warning sign. The sign depicted the Grim Reaper, with the words, "To prevent your death, do not proceed further. There's nothing in this cave that's worth risking your life for." Some are self-destructive, while others were led into danger by their friends. John and Simon have been good friends for many years, and they are the best diving buddies. In terms of experience, John has been cave diving for nearly 10 years. Many of Simon's skills were learned from him. However, John has a tendency to panic. 6 months ago, while diving in a cave, the experienced John suddenly lost control underwater. He ripped off his rebreather and started kicking and grabbing at Simon. Fortunately, Simon remained calm in the crisis. He managed to safely bring the old master back to the surface. Ever since this incident occurred, Simon's wife has not allowed her husband to play with John anymore. But a few months later, John, having lost the support of his friends, came knocking on the door again. He opened with the eagle's nest pit. Simon's face changed at the mention of it, but he couldn't withstand John's relentless persuasion. He still agreed. John and Simon drove to the eagle's nest pit. The plan was to advance all the way to the downstream end, then return along the same route. John's pocket, including the decompression, would be completed within 2.5 hours. At 1 p.m., after both entered the water, they passed through the chimney passage into the banquet hall. They placed the decompression cylinder next to the Grim Reaper warning sign. Then they followed the guideline rope deeper in. They successively passed through the abyss passage, John's pocket, the gym room, and the half-moon room. The depth gradually increased from 60 meters to 88 meters. They finally arrived at the fantasy house at the end of the downstream tunnel. At 1:40 p.m., the two of them began their journey back. Just as Simon dived into the abyss passage and started to climb up, John behind him suddenly stopped moving. He was staring at a side tunnel below. It was as if something had caught his attention. Without a word, he turned and dived into it. Coincidentally, this side tunnel was called John's pocket. After entering this cramped space, the thruster instantly stirred up the sediment at the bottom. Suddenly, it was as black as being buried alive. Panic-stricken, John immediately threw away the thruster. He tried to feel his way out along the guide rope, Unexpectedly, he swam deeper and deeper. What he thought was the exit was actually deeper darkness. Simon, who had just crawled out of the abyss passage, realized that John had not followed him and immediately turned back to look for him. As a result, he too vanished into the murky sediment. 3:30 p.m. The park staff found that the exit records of the two remained empty. However, not a single decompression cylinder at the decompression point had been touched. At this point, there's no need for guessing anymore. Once the news broke, veteran Paul from the American cave diving community led a rescue team to the scene. On the afternoon of the 13th, the search and rescue team found John deep in the downstream tunnel, but Simon was nowhere to be found. The next day, heavy rain poured down. The cave became murky, and the search and rescue had to be called off. On the 15th, after the rain cleared, Paul led the team back into the water. After extensive searching, they finally found Simon's body in the half-moon room. 40 divers took turns in the water, enduring for 3 whole days, before they finally brought the two up to the shore. According to the autopsy, both died of drowning due to asphyxia. The main reason was that John's thruster stirred up silt, effectively trapping himself and leading to his demise. While Simon was turning back to look for him, the murky water also caused him to accidentally enter the half-moon room, ultimately getting his equipment tangled in the guiding rope. He exhausted his air supply while struggling. From 1981 to 2018, the Eagle's Nest sinkhole has taken 13 lives. What truly captivates people is not just beauty, but the more unknown it is, the more they want to see it for themselves. But that darkness will not give you a heads up about when it will close the door on you.